when you experience, and I, in my early childhood experience, kind of like major trauma, and I've worked through that in part with Claimed and with a therapist, that is like whether or not you've completed that cycle before, your body will try to complete it. And so how are you going to do that? Flow is an excellent way to do that with any big T, little t, any type of trauma. And once you close a cycle through that practice, your body is like, okay, I'm safe. Thank you for keeping me safe.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Claimed. Today I have a really special guest. Her name is Toni. She's calling from LA, and she has been one of the successful stories in our Claimed group coaching program. Hi, Toni. How are you? And welcome.
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on board. I'm always curious to hear women's stories. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time and also, for being here with me, because I know it's not something that it's something very personal. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. And hopefully your story will inspire other women to, start thinking about this type of work and maybe even joining us. So let's begin, Toni, with you just briefly sharing a little bit about yourself, as much as you want to share, and then tell us, how did you find my work and Claimed?
Sure. So I am, in case this is helpful for anyone, I'm 30 and I've been dating for many years now. I've done numerous things in order to learn how to date, and I sort of like came upon the program in that way. Currently, I live in New York, technically. I am in LA right now with family, but generally I'm in a city where there's a lot of access to things like going out anywhere at any time and meeting different people and being able to date. I moved to New York because of work, and my life leading up to maybe even just recently has been very work focused. I was super motivated in school growing up and continue to be motivated in my work, but there was a turning point, especially in COVID, where I started to realize, like, okay, I've achieved a certain level of success. I have all of these things that I'd like to share with other people. And I can get into a little bit more detail about this later, but my nuclear family is a little disjointed. My parents got divorced at a very young age, and my brother and I are very close, but generally we're not like a super close-knit nuclear family. And for me, I always thought, well, that will be my path too. I won't have a close-knit nuclear family. And I didn't even understand why I had that thought. It just existed. But there was this like turning point, I suppose, where I was like, well, why don't I think that I can have that if I deep down inside want it? And I want to say that, like, really my whole Claimed journey, so to speak, started as early as like 2016 or 2017. I obviously hadn't heard of the program by that point, but I just remember moving from one major city to another, moving to New York and thinking, like, you know what? I'm just really going to learn how to date. This is important to me. I want to find a partner. And at first I was like, it won't be to find this partner. It's more just to get to know like people and life. And I think I'd seen some of my friends date really successfully and have so much fun. I was like, I want to have that type of fun too. And no better place to do it than New York City. So I think I've told you this, and I've definitely mentioned it in the group, but I moved to New York and I like hit the ground running. I was reading books about dating. I created a spreadsheet of all the people that I went on dates with and each date that I went on. Yeah. Which in retrospect is so masculine, but it was like my vibe at that time. And I think I went on like 30 unique dates in a year. And that didn't include repeat dates. So I had gone on over 50. And I was just like, at the time in the beginning, loving it. And little did I know that was sort of my funnel as I was just
Mm-hmm.
continuously dating. But I had trouble after a year when I was like, okay, I get it. Like I've met so many different guys. Like I get it. I have a spreadsheet. I know what I want. I learned so much, but there were a few men that I had really developed feelings for that did not want to commit. And so then that was sort of the next frontier for me. But I didn't see it as like a growth opportunity or a learning opportunity. I saw it as like, well, maybe this just isn't for me. I'm quote defective in some way. Who knows? Like some excuse basically to think like I'm doing this wrong and maybe it's not meant for me. So I stopped dating for a while and I really threw myself into work again. And I was kind of a workaholic as it was. So to do it even more was not healthy. And I had made very good friends with people who were in committed relationships who were able to have a successful career and also a successful relationship and beyond and sort of plan a future with somebody. And initially, I was very envious of that, which is why I was searching for the answer and what led me to claimed ultimately. But then eventually I saw it as like, this is a beautiful example of what I could have. But in that moment, when I was really envious, I was like, I think I searched why, as a woman, do I feel so masculine? And
Mm.
that was like I had never put those that to me was sort of like divine intervention because I never really I had never seen myself as either masculine or feminine. Deep down inside, I do think I must have identified with being more masculine, but outside, like my body, I presented feminine. Sure, I got my nails done, I did my makeup, whatever. But that sentence when it came out in Google was like not I it just like popped out. And big data would have it. The claim program wasn't the first thing to come up, but I think I'd been searching it enough where some sort of ad like came up on Facebook, but it literally said some, tagline about femininity. And I was like so drawn to it because one, you had like a very powerful photo, which I think is the photo that you use in most of like the claim podcast too. But two, you had sort of marketed it, and I watched the webinar as like a curriculum, which for my, again, masculine presenting brain, especially at that time, I was like, oh, great, I can learn this thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I also like, it really resonated with me that there was a component of it that was embodiment. I mean, pretty much the entire, but at that time, I didn't know how much of it would be that. But I read about that and I started reading all your blogs in Medium. And I was like, this makes sense to me because there is something inside my body that's telling me to do something about this. Like I can't be a workhorse forever. I can't be alone forever. Like I just didn't want to live that life anymore. So if I
Mm-hmm.
felt it in my body then, and there's a component of it, of this program that's embodiment, that feels right to me. And I didn't even understand what that meant. I just was like trying to connect to my intuition more. And I had read a little bit more about understanding your intuition, when to act on your intuition as opposed to when it's like your fear mind speaking. So because it felt right in my body, I was like, I'm just going to see. And then I got scared, but I got scared and then eventually I came back. But I was like about to do the
You got
discovery
scared
call,
at what point?
like right as I was about to schedule a discovery call, I think with you. And I was
Mm.
just like, oh, this this seems to me like I'm trying to learn how to be feminine as a woman. Like I should already know that. And I felt kind of ashamed of that. Like, why do I need to
Mm.
learn how to do this? But ultimately, in reading more about how the way that our society is structured to an extent, especially the corporate world, sort of like puts people in that position to be away from the feminine side of their pole. That's what made
Mm-hmm.
me think like, okay, maybe this is conditioning. And if I've been conditioned this way, then I can condition myself the other way that feels more authentic, because that's really what it came down to is I felt like I wasn't living an authentic life by that point.
Mm-hmm.
So then I
Mm-hmm.
tried to schedule again, and then I met with Barbara ultimately.
Okay. Wow, what a story. So to summarize, yeah, it's really interesting your journey. And every woman's journey is different to how they find this work and the program. That's why this is the first question, because I really want to understand the situation before you've found claimed and joined. And yeah, really interesting that you were actually quite active in terms of dating, because you were in New York. What a great opportunity. And I love that you've had your funnel before, so you were
Hmm.
actively dating. You're Because not every woman is like that. And it seems like you were having a lot of fun and doing it like you're supposed to be doing, right? But yeah, you're saying that you noticed that pattern of falling for men, or developing feelings for men who were emotionally unavailable or didn't want to commit. And so when you see that pattern, you start to question, what am I doing wrong? Or you mentioned the word defective, or you know um, what do I do with it? And so, yeah, really interesting that you googled why as a woman I'm so masculine, and then started reading and doing the webinar, and then that led you to the discovery call. And I love that you're sharing that you got a little bit scared, because I think a lot of women are in that space as well. It's almost like, hmm, how shall I explain? I think what comes to my mind is Christina. I've interviewed her on the podcast as well, but how she kind of, I guess, convinced herself to sign up
Hmm.
for a discovery call and to invest in this area of her life. Because, well, her thinking was like, well, I invest in a coach for my career, right?
Hmm.
So why can't I apply the same logic or strategy to, finding my husband, or, yeah, discovering myself and stuff like that. And it's really interesting how um, this area of our life, it almost seems like, well, I should know this. I shouldn't
Hmm.
have to like invest, thousands of dollars in something that it should be so natural to me. It's almost like, why do I need to get help to discover me, or even discover this world of relation, because I should know this. Yeah, and I totally understand why you're saying that there might be some shame around it, or some, like, it's almost like it might feel like you're admitting to yourself that you somehow failed
Hmm.
in this particular area of your life. And this is really uncomfortable for women like me and you, who are very successful and smart, and like, we've got all the degrees
Perfectionist.
and
Yeah, yeah.
certifications and all of that, and here you are, whether you're 30 or 40, especially, one I find that for women, it's harder as they age,
Hmm.
because then you're like, well, I'm a 42-year-old woman, and I've got this house and this career and everything, and I just, yeah, it really, that moment is so tender and vulnerable to admit, and to do that step, and then to sign up and to invest in yourself. So I relate to that, for sure. So yeah, but you did sign up, and here you are on a
Yes.
discovery call, right? Which is a free discovery call. And by the way, you mentioned the webinar, and I just want to mention to all the listeners and viewers that they can go and watch the webinar if they're interested, and they, sense a pull. And since you watched that webinar, I've now come up with a new version of it, which
Oh,
is
nice.
a version that's a lot more concise. Like you mentioned, curriculum. This is like the uh, this is my body of work in like a
Hmm.
40-minute training, literally everything that I know, and it very much outlines the journey of the program and everything, but in a very concise, and the images are more powerful. I've got like new cool colors and like
Oh,
all
I
of that.
love it.
So for everyone, it's claim.com/, training where they can sign up for that. And I should actually share in our group, because I think a lot of women have girlfriends who are wondering, you know, how do I do this or whatever, that they can share with their friends as well. So coming back to your journey, Tony, so you signed up for Discovery Call. Now, tell us what happened on the Discovery Call, especially after you've been a little bit like, scared. And then why did you sign up?
Oh, I mean, it was almost like a blur because at that point I was so, again, there are just so many aspects to which I think led to a lot of aha moments with this program. So many aspects that I couldn't think my way into those situations, right? Like they just sort of happened. And even on the discovery call with Barbara, I was just I was just so like stricken by how great she was at listening to me and how to me it like she I could sense her femininity through the camera.
Mm,
And at that time, I was like I had signed up for the discovery call, but meanwhile, I'm doing a ton of like research on the back end, right? Obviously, once I become interested in something, I like obsess over it. I'm reading everything about it, and I developed more of a vocabulary around it. And
mm-hmm,
so I sort of like finally understood in words what I was looking for. And the word also that I kept hearing from friends is like, oh, a relationship that's meant to be will just feel easy. And it's not necessarily that I wanted something to feel easy. I think I understood for me, it's like, well, I I have I've learned so much through like work, hard work, not just like my work and my profession, but just like in researching and being curious and doing these things, it didn't feel like work. That to me is a sense of ease. It just felt good in my body, pretty literally. And when I was speaking to Barbara, I was like, wow, this feels like so nice. And there was this promise of a community. And that was something else that I was sort of missing in my life in terms of dating because I had two groups. I had the group of girlfriends who were committed and could offer me so much advice about like being in a relationship, but not necessarily about dating. And when they did, sometimes it was good and sometimes it was like so harsh, like, oh, he messed up this one time, like never go out with him again. I was like, I remember when you were dating your committal partner right now and things were not always peachy, but it was hard for them to like go back to that time in their life. And then there was the other group of women who were like extremely bitter about men, who were just like F men, like I don't know if I'm
mm,
allowed to curse on the podcast, but like they just were really upset by the whole thing. So I was
mm,
somewhere in the middle where I sort of believed like, "Ooh, are there good men?" And of course, reading your blog, I would see some of these titles and I was like, "Oh my god, she literally took that sentence out of my brain and then wrote about it." So, I'm going into these calls with that mindset of like, okay, the women who are involved in this program understand where I was coming from. And I really felt understood by Barbara. And
mm,
she also had a situation just in terms of like engaging with men who were non-committal or emotionally unavailable that resonated with me. And so I was like, okay, she gets it. And she's here saying, like, this program will help you beyond even the dating, but just like almost the infrastructure of my femininity, like understanding it and learning how to engage with it. And I was like, whoa, this is like beyond just dating at this point, which I loved. So I pretty much
mhm.
signed up like immediately after the call, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, well, beautiful. I love that you said the infrastructure of my femininity. Um, how do you explain that, like in your mind when you say this? Because like these are two words that people don't use together.
Hmm.
So I'm curious, and now, of course, from the perspective of have gone through the program and have seen success, I'm curious, how do you explain that the infrastructure of my femininity?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's been because I think on the outside, people think of femininity as perhaps the way you look on the outside, like your hair, your makeup, or even certain things that you say or how you act. But when I was on the discovery call with Barbara, I remember thinking like there's sort of a way to access it, or a skill set, or using femininity to be able to act out certain parts of your life. Like in the way to more obviously describe it is like when I am in a more masculine pole, like there are ways that I can do certain things in my life, like my job, for example. And that infrastructure or underlying skill set for me is very honed. It's almost like second nature. I don't even really know how to
Mm-hmm.
describe how it works. And that's how I wanted to get with femininity. Like I wanted to be able to operate from that place and understand all the various facets of it, like the the actual feeling of your body, the different metaphors of femininity, like the wave and going with the flow and the intuition, like that to me was magical, and that to me was like the infrastructure of it. It's not just like, oh yeah, of course I can curl my hair and I can put on my makeup, but that's just like the painting on the building. It's not like what the building is made of. So that's
Mm-hmm.
sort of what I wanted to learn.
Mm-hmm. So kind of like the anatomy
Hmm.
of like what's actually inside, because what you see on the outside is like what, a lot of information or even programs or thing, about femininity, like Google femininity, and it's going to be all about, the hair, the makeup, the
Hmm.
flowers, the candles, the fashion, all of that creativity, um connecting to nature and all of that stuff. And look, I teach that as well,
Hmm.
um in the middle of the program. But what I think is that how this work is really different is it actually doesn't start with that. Like all of that is just kind of sprinkles on the surface. But yeah, through the tools of embodiment, it really helps women to rediscover themselves and understand all of the, like, the insides,
Hmm.
what's on the inside, and your feminine flavor, how we call it in the program. You call the infrastructure. We can look at that anatomy or the carcass. It's almost like, what are the organs, and the, like, here's the
Yeah.
body, right? But what's actually inside, and most importantly, it's probably how does it feel. And so I think it's a perfect moment to basically, um, you know we could shift gears now and talk about your aha moments, in the program. Because when you sign up, you don't know.
Mhm.
You taking a leap of faith, and which I really appreciate, that a woman who doesn't know what's on the inside, she says yes to herself. As you said, it's a really, I thought it was powerful when you said, I learned to trust my intuition and not get into my head about why I shouldn't do this and all of that. Because, the mind kicks in, especially like when you look at the investment and all of that. So, but I'm glad you did say yes. And so tell us more about what happened in the program and what were your perhaps 2, 3 aha moments.
Yeah, so already one that I was going to talk about was the aspect of trust, because I think there is trust in your mind and then there's trust in your body, and they can
Mm,
coexist beautifully. But trust in your body, especially as a woman, with the way that we're taught, at least I was taught, especially growing up, I had a very negative view of my body, in part because of my relationship with my parents. And I also, had disordered eating habits and different things like that. So, this concept of like my
mm,
body giving me messages that are meaningful and that I can trust, was super foreign to me. And feminine embodiment was like such a simple way to regain that trust, because it is very, first of all, my bedroom in Brooklyn is small. It's not, and I don't do my feminine embodiment in the living room always, because I don't want, my partner or my friends to be like, what is that? Oh, unless they're curious, then I always tell them. But I do it in my room. It's very, you can do it in very little space and get so much out of it. And you also like, it's not performative. It's just purely literally how you're feeling. You can be who it's like dancing like no one's watching, but actually no one's watching, and relinquishing that judgment helps you develop a feeling of trust with your body that I don't think many other things do. Like I actually can't really think of anything else that allows you to do that. Um, and I also realized in my life I had a form of some type of embodiment leading up to basically when I graduated college and moved into my professional career. I was a dancer, and that to me brought some aspect of embodiment because I loved to dance, but there was still judgment with it because you had your instructor looking at you, you had your coach,
Mm,
whatever.
and it was
This
performative. That's the
right.
difference between, because people are like, what is this dancing? And it's not dancing. I mean, there's obviously elements of it and the expression through your body of music, but I think the main difference is that the performance of it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other powerful thing about embodiment that was sort of an aha moment for me is I had a tendency before the program to, if I had some intense emotion, to just forget about it. And then it would come up in some other way later. And usually
Hmm.
in like something bodily, like I would just be like so frustrated with something and I feel like I'd have to scream. With embodiment, the power to be able to recall certain emotions and move through them and then recall and call on other emotions, I thought was so cool. I almost felt like, I don't know, like I was, how some actors, when you see them in films, I know that's also performative, but when you see them like really being someone that they're not, they're playing this character. I felt like, well, I can call in these emotions about my life, and I know what they feel like now. I can use them in real life, like certain aspects when it came to dating, about envisioning and embodying what it felt like to be in a committed relationship. That's just so
Mm.
key. It's like a little map for you, so that when I would go on a date and I had already envisioned how it felt in my body to be good, like feel good in the date, and I felt it, I was like, ding, 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 I don't have to do any more work. I know this feels good. I've done it before in a flow. Um, and so
Mm.
I can just trust it. Whereas before, I would go on dates and it would feel good. And believe it or not, I would be like, no, this is too good to be true. I can't possibly see this through. And I think that while some of my dating experience was with non committal men, going into another aha was about men as mirrors. Um, I think it was more that they were reflecting my energy,
Mm.
where I would
So
feel really good.
before we talk
Hmm.
about that, sorry to interrupt. I wanted to
No,
ask you a
that's okay.
question. You mentioned disordered eating habits, and
Hmm.
I think this is, I mean, obviously, for a lot of women, this is common. And I'm curious, could you talk a little bit more about that? Because with the work that we're doing in the program, some of the exercises and the excavation of what are the belief systems we hold about men, about ourselves and the relationships, that brings us a lot to the past and all of those things that are happening, and it forces us to examine the reasons why we're reacting in a certain way or behaving in a certain way. And yeah, for you it was, as you said, you didn't grow up in a close nuclear family, and then you didn't trust your body, which then you followed by a head disordered eating habit. So I'm curious, how did that how does that connect? Because we're talking about men, for example, and this
Hmm.
program is about rediscovering your femininity and trust with yourself. How does that connect with disordered eating habits?
Well, I think the disordered eating was a manifestation of the mistrust that I had with my body, where it was sort of like I can't possibly rely on my body's hunger signals to inform me when I've had enough to eat versus, if I'm full or if I'm hungry. And with the sort of working with a therapist through that, there were a lot of similarities between like the limiting beliefs excavation and reframing exercises that I did with that type of therapy, but it was all very heady until there was a
Mhm.
point where my therapist was like, okay, well, we're going to do this exercise where like I want you to go pick out a meal and by yourself just like really enjoy that meal and savor the various flavors in the meal. Don't think about, and this had already been at a point where I in theory reframed many of these beliefs that I had around food. And so when I saw this sort of come together in the program, I was like, whoa, this is so cool that I've like sort of done something like this before and that I can apply a similar skill set here. But that was embodiment for me in terms of food, right? Was the sitting,
Mm.
making sure the environment, I was like outside in sun and I was like literally closing my eyes to taste the food better and to
Mhm.
enjoy the experience. And it's still not like, I sort of wish that there had been more of an aspect of embodiment like how we do in this program with that, because I've actually worked on some of the disordered eating stuff with this program.
Mhm.
But it was sort of like an intro to embodiment, I think, at that time. And in terms of this program, um, I mean, the the modules that work on limiting beliefs and reframing and using feminine embodiment for that and flow is like a skill set for life. Like goes beyond dating, in my opinion. And so I did do
Mm.
some of the disordered, and my disordered eating now is like basically non-existent. But I never say that it's completely gone because you know it sometimes comes up if I'm stressed. But with flow, with feminine embodiment, I was able to like bring in some of the beliefs that I had from that and reframe them. And
Yeah.
that was sort of like to me kind of an initial step before I even got to limiting beliefs that were related to just dating. Although ultimately I do think a lot of these beliefs have core beliefs that are very similar, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, this subject of disordered eating habits is actually quite is fascinating to me at the moment. And I don't know if you've seen, me sharing some books in the community and
Mhm.
stuff. Because for me personally, it's really interesting that when I grew up, I didn't have those habits or behaviors, or at least I didn't. And now that I'm thinking, um, I grew up in Eastern Europe, and I think
Mhm.
it's really interesting how this I didn't even know these thing like disordered eating habits or bulimia or whatever
Mhm.
anorexia existed, and it almost seems like it's one of those problems of the West,
Mhm.
of societies that. Uh, have plenty, so to say, because it's
Mhm.
all about binge eating. And when I grew up, like I didn't have anything to binge on, in
Mhm.
terms of like, um, I grew up in the poorest country in Europe where we had oranges and bananas for on holidays,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So food was very scarce, and I must have like developed coping mechanisms in other ways.
Mhm.
Well, for me, it was smoking. It's really interesting that as I talk to you about this, I'm having more realization. But, I started smoking cigarettes when I was 14, and
Oh
that was
wow,
my
yeah.
addiction, essentially. And then it was really interesting that, like, so I actually smoked for about not more than 10 years, so maybe 12, 14 years. And then I quit. And then just not recently, in the last few years, I've always had skin problems, like adult
Mm.
acne was my thing, and I've done a lot of work around that. And
Mhm.
then just recently, actually this year, I've realized, that the acne basically was on my skin because of my essentially addiction to sugar,
Mm.
dairy or gluten, which is food, which is comfort food. And for a long
Mhm.
time, I didn't even realize that it actually is connected to. It's a disordered eating. Well, I don't know if I would qualify this disordered eating habit, but it was emotional eating,
Yeah.
and it was such a revelation to me. And I found this book. I don't know if you've heard of it or read it. It's called Women, Food, and God.
Yeah, it's on my list after you recommended it.
Oh yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't read it fully, but it's not about religion or anything. But it was so interesting when I was reading this. I was like, oh my God, and I had this moment of like, okay, I'm a feminine embodiment coach. And
Mhm.
why have I never connected my, desire or addiction to
Mm.
food and to essentially, you know, I would I would go for food when I'm feeling bored or stressed,
Mhm.
overwhelmed. Instead of learning how to sit with that discomfort in the body.
Mhm.
I have mastered this when it comes to men, and like my father and all of that kind of personal growth stuff in terms of life, but especially relationships.
Mhm.
And I'm an expert at it. That's why I have a whole program in helping women. But for some reason, I did not, it was so bizarre, this realization. I did not apply this um, into my relationship with food.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, it was quite big, and but you're right. It's the same thing. It's
Mm.
it's going back to, and in that book, and I was quite struck how this woman. This book was written, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago or something. How this woman was saying that, you know, and I was lucky that my addiction to food was not manifesting in weight. I was
Mhm.
extremely lucky because of my body, metabolism and stuff like that, but it was on the skin, right? And so
Yeah.
she was talking mostly about women who, when we gain the weight, it's not actually about the weight, but it's about uh, allowing yourself to sit with the discomfort of whatever the hell you're thinking, feeling, and actually the beliefs of I'm not worthy. Essentially, it's all about the same thing we do in the
Yeah.
program, right? It all goes down to the three core limiting beliefs: I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, or I don't deserve love, and it all obviously stems from childhood and the beliefs that we take upon, and then as children. You just go for food because you go for what's available and what's easier because you don't know. Or, for example, same thing goes with sexual abuse or
Mhm.
trauma or whatever. These are all of these are just coping mechanisms. And so
Yeah.
embodiment is pretty much the answer to everything, or, somatic therapy. Because what you said, when you're working with your therapist, there was such a good exercise to go and actually enjoy the food, um, and feminine embodiment stems from somatic therapy, as it has the same principles that
Mhm.
here's a tool to help you sit with that discomfort of
Mhm.
boredom, of loneliness. Like as you said, in the past, we have these mechanisms of I'm just going to forget, and we're going to move on, and I'm going to pile up this frozen tension in my body and these
Yeah.
beliefs and stuff, and it's here, and in my head I'm trying to figure it out. That's why a lot of the times therapy that's not somatic or doesn't have the somatic elements doesn't really work as much, because yes, you can understand, like a lot of women who join our program, they understand why things are happening, but they still can't fix anything, right? They can't move on or get past it. So anyways, this was a bit of a segue in terms of disordered eating habits, and there's definitely a connection with that, and how we then go into the world, and essentially these dynamics then manifest in our dynamics with men, which
Totally.
is the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, that for sure when I was younger held me back because it was just like to your point, it was a manifestation of certain core beliefs that I had, and rather than sitting with the discomfort of the emotions that came from those beliefs. So that first of all is identifying the
Mm.
belief. That's like the hard work too that you end up doing in the program as well. But you don't even want to think about the belief, much less feel the emotions. So
Mhm.
that just affects
Mhm.
how you present to the world. That's why I think like it ended up being this program is so much more than dating. While that I think is a huge perk, like obviously I wanted to be in a committed relationship with a masculine man, but it was like so many more things came into play, and I saw the value of it in many other facets of my life. Um,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Beautiful. So let's move on to this thing, men as mirrors, because I feel like it's all
Hmm.
connected. But tell me more, because you were talking about I developed trust in my body, regained trust in my body, and the second aha moment was men as mirrors.
Hmm. So there were sensations that I would get when I felt good around certain men that I was dating before I was enrolled in the program, where I just had this almost like, I don't want to say it was this habit that I had where when things were going really well, I would almost play out mental scenarios and even act as though those scenarios existed where it's like things wouldn't work out.
Mm.
And I I mean, I don't know how much detail you actually want me to go into, but there was a relationship where I was committed to a man who was actually a more feminine man. And it really frustrated me because I did feel like I was mothering him a lot. But at that time, there was something in my mind that was logically telling me, oh, if you nurture him and mother him, then he'll want to stay with you because of this underlying belief and fear that I had that all men will eventually leave me.
Mm.
And some of that fear stemmed from the fact that it was fear of abandonment that I had developed in childhood, for example. And it basically that relationship came to a head and he broke up with me. And I actually, in that conversation, was I like laughed out loud because I was like, wow, my biggest fear that I always fantasize about, and I have like a film playing in my head over and over that it's probably going to happen, ended up happening even with the guy that I thought it was never in a million years going to happen with. So, what does this say? And I totally like, a lot of my friends were like, he was in the wrong and he was a D bag and you shouldn't have been with him. But in my mind, I was like, I'm accountable to this to an extent. And maybe it's a little bit like subconscious and not everyone can understand that. Like, I'm not actively telling my friends all the time, oh, I have this mental movie in my head where people are always breaking up with me, because it's very vulnerable. But
Mm.
in my head, I was like, I need to be accountable to this story that I keep telling myself because I think there's something energetically that I'm presenting that other people are picking up on. And it's like subconscious. Like I don't even know that they're picking up on it. So when the men as mirrors aspect of claims came about, I was like, this is what I must have been thinking that I didn't have words for it back then. And then I also hadn't done any like I hadn't really felt what that was for me until the program. And I was like, okay, well, I've done some things in the past where I can see how they might have manifested in these ways with some of these men that I've dated. What if I just decide to be like, just have a ton of fun, and when things are good, act like it, and try not to be too afraid and create scenarios that don't exist and act them out as if they do, and let me see as an experiment how guys will react to that. And honestly, it was like, oh, a night and day difference over like a week after I decided to be more conscious of that and go into my dates with that mindset.
Mm.
It's just like the men felt at ease around me because I was at ease. And it wasn't like I didn't have a care in the world. I was just like, this is fun. This is spontaneous. We'll see where this goes. And I'm not going to think about tomorrow yet because right now, and even going back to the food thing, right? The whole exercise, the somatic exercise, and being present with the food was that I was like enjoying just that food in that moment. Don't think about like whether you're going to fit into your jeans later. Just like really enjoy this moment. That's sort of how I felt with like, don't think that this man is already going to break up with you when you guys aren't even together yet.
Mm.
And so that definitely translated, like people fed off my energy. And that energy was not just dating, it was with my friendships. It was like planning trips. I was so much more laid back. I used to be like, I still am type A, but it was different. I don't always like have it manifest in my behavior that way, if that makes sense.
Mm. Mm. It's like the feminine type A, where you're
Hmm.
like type A, but you can lean back, and you
Right.
have the tools to not be so stuck in your head all the time, not taking everything so seriously, not attaching to all of these triggers,
Mhm.
and yeah, just that's what women report, and that's what I feel in my life. Like you're just much more calm, and not in a constant, reactive mode.
Totally.
Um, yeah, is there anything else you want to share in terms of an aha moment, or shall we move on to where are you now?
Um, this can segue into where am I now because this is, I think, an important aha moment for me was around vulnerability. I thought that I knew what it was. I thought it meant like when someone asks you, as they would ask you in a job interview, what's your life like? Or some other sentimental question, that I should just regurgitate my life story or like tell them about a problem. And that was vulnerability. But it isn't. I learned so much more about it through the program and because of it. And it's an emotional bodily component to there is an emotional bodily component to vulnerability that I didn't really understand and hadn't clicked until
Mm.
this program. And it's not like when I thought I knew what vulnerability is, that was a pretty and perfect packaged version of it. It was like a digestible version of it. But really, what it means for me now is it's unpredictable, it's spontaneous, it can be messy. And I sort of like had two ways of thinking and why I rejected vulnerability to begin with and before the program was I was afraid that if I were vulnerable or I had some sort of flaw that people would not accept me for who I am. And so there
Mm.
were two ways around that. The first way is just push people away, which is I always used to think, oh, that's easy. I can just be a loner. But it's not easy. Life is way harder without other people and with the help that they can offer to you. And then the second part of it is, or like the second way around it is to just be perfect all the time. And so I was like very much this perfectionist person, but in accepting vulnerability and realizing and having evidence that people will care for you, love you, accept you for who you are, despite it frees you and it makes you relinquish this perfectionism that's really stopping you from getting to other places in life.
Hmm. So when you say there's a bodily component to it, I'm curious, what does that mean exactly for you? Like, how were you able to access that, or what's the difference between how you were seeing vulnerability before and how are you showing up now?
I mean, to be honest, in like pretty literally the most practical sense of bodily is I cry more than I used to, and not in a panicky way, just like in a releasing way. In I don't want to say controlled. That's not the right word. Just in a way where it's like this is one way for me to express my vulnerability with or without other people. Like I don't necessarily cry a lot more in front of other people. It's just there are times where I would get frustrated. I felt like crying in the past, and I would say, no, 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 don't cry. This is a sign of
Mm,
weakness. And
mm,
now it's like, okay, if I cry for 30 seconds, then I'm like, oh, I feel a lot better and I can move on. And I also, even sometimes when I'm upset around my friends used to tell me, Toni never cries or Toni is solid as a rock. And I think even hearing that the first time, I was like, I don't know that I really want to be that because I sometimes want help, but I didn't want to admit that. And now I have friends who they don't say, Toni, oh my God, you cry all the time. Like, I can't believe it. They actually say, you're so much more relatable. You're not like this
mm,
stone cold person. And also, there's something in my body, and I don't know if this resonates with other people when it comes to vulnerability, where like when you feel something and you want to be vulnerable, but you say no, it's like a blockage. Like I feel like a tightness in my chest versus when I am vulnerable, I feel an openness, like a sigh of relief. And that feeling of relief, I did not experience before,
mm, mhm.
you know?
Yeah. So, so the experience of it in my body, and I think it's in everybody's bodies, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're right. True vulnerability is when you allow yourself to express
Mm-hmm.
what is happening in your body in this moment in time, whether it's convenient or not. Um, and that's why I love embodiment, because it really, because obviously, like, as people, we live in a society, and there are certain situations where you can't fully express, right?
Mhm.
But because we've been conditioned to be, oh, solid as a rock. I used to
Mhm.
wear that as a badge of honor, because everybody
Mhm.
can rely on me, and I'm like the strongest one, and whatever, whatever. And then you create these like walls,
Mhm.
right? Or that hard shell that you wear as your cape or whatever. And but what that does is that you build up that everything that's coming up for you, so the discomfort in your body. Let's say there's a situation, doesn't feel good, it hurts, right? And so instead of what most people do, like bottle it up and
Mhm.
say, no, can't express that, can't be weak. Um, in a certain situation, obviously you can't express that fully. Let's say if you're at work or whatever.
Mhm.
Although if you flex that muscle, so that's why we do feminine flow in the program, in the safety of your own home, in your bedroom or whatever, wherever you can do it, every day, right? It gives you the opportunity to express that
Mhm.
discomfort in the body, that frozen tension, because whenever that happens, the body is really wise, because we're all animals, right? And mammals do it. Um, when there's that fight, flight, or freeze
Mhm.
response. It's like you see animals do it, like shake their bodies, or if something happens like a traumatic response, you would see a gazelle like shaking after being chased by a tiger or whatever, or a lion. And as human, like, that's what embodiment is really. When you actually look, it's not some woohoo concept or whatever. It's like when you go deep and you explore and study this, you understand that the body always looks for completion, that
Mhm.
cycle of, I've just been traumatized or like triggered. There's mini trauma, big trauma, whatever, but it's like in the body. And the body, that's why when we talk about sexual abuse, for example, specifically in children, somatic therapy is actually proven to be one of the best ways to treat trauma. Well,
Oh,
especially, trauma in
yeah.
veterans, like PTSD and sexual abuse, simply because when an event happens, I'm talking about like actual like big
Yeah,
trauma, like
major trauma.
war, major, or like sexual abuse or whatever, that experience, that event is so traumatic, it's so overwhelming to the system, that you you do not know, or you do not actually have the tools in the moment to deal with it, and therefore you literally disassociate.
Yeah.
Because if you don't disassociate, it's too much for the system. And so how do you heal that? How do you deal with that in therapy and stuff? It's with providing the body an opportunity to complete the cycle,
Mhm.
to express and release that frozen tension that's in the body. And so when we take it down and like talk about the micro traumas or the triggers, because like an everyday interaction, let's say with a
Mhm.
man, like he told you he's not into you, like,
Mhm.
it hurts. And it hurts here. Like, that's why in the program, as coaches, we always ask, can we locate that in the body? How does that feel? Right? Or what's the texture of that? And then
Mhm.
obviously providing all of the women in the program tools to identify where, because we can't even, most women enter the program, they're completely numb from the head down. We
Yeah.
do these practices and then sometimes look at their faces on Zoom and they're like, what the hell is happening right now? Why am I dropping
Mhm.
into the body? Or what is this 45-minute guided thing? And but yeah, when you give the body an opportunity and an avenue to complete, to actually, okay, well, let's, as you said, one thing is to realize the belief, but oh my God, now I have to feel it. It's like,
Mhm.
no, that so many women, time and time again, I experience that they are so afraid to actually feel because it's scary, right? I can't allow myself to feel that I'm good, not good enough. Like, what are you talking? That's going to kill me. Like, literally, there is
Yeah.
that experience that this is going to kill me, where in reality it doesn't. But so, anyways, this was a little bit of a segue into what embodiment really is, and how beautiful it is when, and that's what vulnerability is, when you flex that muscle of allowing yourself to feel and actually express it in the moment and say, oh,
Mhm.
that really hurts, or this is how I feel, and then you give it completion. So that's what true vulnerability is, rather than like keeping it back and then packaging it up in a nice way to say
Mhm.
what you've experienced and stuff. I mean, of course, that can happen. Like, you either do it in the moment, and even at work, that's why you're all women who do the work, they experience this not only in dating, where you're so much more relatable and down to earth, and you create an experience and like this moment with a man, of presence, but it also, manifests in your friendships, in your,
Mhm.
at work, where you're just like so much more present and here, and people feel it. So, yeah, it's really beautiful you
Yeah.
sharing that. So, Tonya, where are you now? Tell us, because we started with your journey where you were dating and it was fun and you were doing the right things, but there was something missing there where you were attracting men who were emotionally unavailable, and there was a pattern there. So, you wanted to break that pattern and also learn about that, the feminine infrastructure of your
Mhm.
being, and wanting to learn how to do that. So, where are you now?
Now I would say I am, well, first of all, I'm so much more relaxed. Like, I have everyone telling me that, minus my boyfriend, because he probably didn't realize how how, high strung I was before the program. But I am in a committed relationship. I'm super happy. It's not perfect. I always want to like say that, because in case it's more relatable to people, because sometimes I
Mhm.
think it can be, like, I'm in a relationship and I'm so happy and nothing is wrong. And
Mhm.
it's not that everything's perfect. It's that now I feel so much better equipped to handle what does come at me. And I've been in the program for almost a year now, and I still go to the group, and I still go to the coaching calls, and I still like learn from everyone. And it's also just a commitment to the flow. Like, I like being part of the group so that I can continue my commitment, because it's empowering and motivating to see other people do it. I had never heard of feminine embodiment or flow even just a year ago, so I'm doing that every day now for at least like 10 minutes. Sometimes I do it longer. Um, and I'm a lot more present. I think I definitely am continuing to explore my feminine flavor, but I have a much better grasp at like understanding what it means for me, understanding the fact that it's been inside of me all along. I just hadn't really given her the attention that she needed.
Mhm.
And I am like just so grateful to have leaned into a program like this, because I'll give you a little bit more context. But I studied engineering in college, and I actually moved into a more creative role, in part because of claims, but I did do
Hmm.
like math and science analytical work before this program. And so for me to hear about something I'd never heard about, and to decide, oh, you know what, I'm going to try it, is like unheard of, because I always would do so much research, or I just want to understand in totality what I was signing up for. This was just again a bodily feeling where I was like, I should try this. And now it's something I do every day. Like, I would have never, a year ago, you couldn't tell me that I was going to be doing this as part of a daily practice. So I feel also like I the trust aspect is huge. I mean, even what you were saying about vulnerability and somatic therapies, if you think about that in the context of trust, it's like when you experience, and I, in my early childhood experience, kind of like major trauma, and I've worked through that in part with claimed and with a therapist. That is like, whether or not you've completed that cycle before, your body will try to complete it. And
Mhm.
so, how are you going to do that? Flow is an excellent way to do that with any big T, little t, any type of trauma. Um, and once you close a cycle through that practice, your body is like, okay, I'm safe. Thank you for keeping me safe. It's like you develop a relationship. sounds so meta and strange for someone who studied
No,
engineering,
no, but
right? But
it's yeah. What
yeah.
I love what you're saying, and I don't know whether was this your own realization or is this something that you've studied, read about that your body will actually try to complete the cycle and repeat.
I did learn that vocabulary through therapy because I
Mm-hmm.
was enacting the same. I called them just patterns. Like when I would speak
Mm-hmm.
to my therapist
Mm-hmm.
about them, I'd be like,
Mm-hmm.
why is the same thing happening over and over
Mm-hmm.
again? And they would say, your body's trying to help you actually and close this. They didn't say
Yeah.
close the cycle, but the way you said it, I thought was really eloquent. Like it's true. It's your body's trying to fix, basically. It's trying to have a second chance at what happened.
Yeah, and it's super interesting. Like some of the books about trauma and somatic therapy, there's this example which is so bizarre when you really think about it. But especially as I mentioned before, like veterans who are dealing with PTSD, there was one day out of the year that this guy who've been in war in Vietnam, just totally random, he didn't even realize it, but on, let's say, the 15th of March, whatever, he would take his gun and he would go into a store on that specific day, and he would reenact some sort of pull out his gun and say, I don't know, give me, I can't remember what the situation was, but it was like
Yeah.
super bizarre. The police was there and everything. It was every single year. And and he didn't even realize it. But when you look at when he started working with a therapist, they both, the therapist uncovered that that was the day that one of his
Mm,
mates, was killed in front of him, in war. And so, and I'm getting goosebumps thinking about this, but a lot of people experience this, and they even look at people, who get into accidents over and over and over
mm,
again, or like when you cut your finger. It's
mhm.
so bizarre to like think about that, because it's almost like metaphysical, kind of like there's some woohoo part to it, but
Yeah.
it's all evidence that your body is actually trying to get into the same situation over and over again to, as you said, complete that cycle.
Mhm.
Like I'm trying to reenact. So what this guy was doing essentially is trying to reenact that situation unconsciously so that he can complete the cycle and express and actually relive. That's what's happening. That's what we're doing even in Pat. Like I love how you said big T, little
Mhm.
t, the little t
Mhm.
in all of us, or whether we call it trauma or trigger. The little t stands for little trauma or trigger or micro whatever. Same thing we're doing with men and with these patterns, because what we're doing is we unconsciously want to relive that situation, get another chance at it, so that
Mhm.
we can do it right, so that we can complete it. It's the body's always looking for ways to come to that homeostasis state, that
Mhm.
is the balanced state. And so, but we can't. Most people don't have those tools, and so that's what's beautiful about somatic therapy. And actually in children, what they do is, when a child has been abused or whatever, um, they the qualified therapist would do role plays
Mhm.
for that specific situation, either with toys or teddies or stuff like that, and then would do it. It was so beautiful. I read this in a book. I think it was the Peter Levine's book about Waking the Tiger, but he was
Mm.
explaining that situation of child abuse, and then he would reenact this same situation with toys or parents or whatever over and over and over again, up until the point where the child leads this, like follows his body, up until the child gets to the place where that situation or that trauma isn't being role played anymore in his own
Mm.
experience. So it's just fascinating, and like I've always been like I wanted to understand this in totality and not just coach, like, because I mean, obviously I see
Yeah.
the results of it in my life and in the life of all the women joining the program, but it's fascinating to see that when you give the body just the non-linear way to express itself and follow
Mhm.
your lead without my necessarily guidance, but just let the body lead, the body
Mhm.
will always come to completion. That's why all of these women, including you're seeing such incredible results in how you feel, that you're a lot
Mhm.
more calmer, you're not reacting anymore, and things just fix themselves if you just do the work and show up.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
patterns play out in dating too. That was sort of the more obvious, like, thing that would come up for
Mm-hmm.
me,
Mm-hmm.
when I was first sort of understanding flow and, like, literally replaying certain scenarios that had come up in dating that I wanted to fully experience the emotions for. And also, scenarios that were extremely pleasurable and fun that I wanted to embody too, like knowing that you can have both. It's
Mm-hmm.
just it's like fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So last thing I want to talk about is about your boyfriend, your committed masculine man that you attracted, and now you're together. Congratulations! This
Thank
is the
you.
ultimate success that I think all women who join the program want. It happens. I mean, it happens for a lot of women. I would say
Yeah.
probably for most of them. It just the timing is very different. For one woman it can be a few months. For another, it can be a year. But eventually, if you do the work, it will happen. Although we do not attach to that result, right?
Mhm.
That's the main thing. But tell me more about how did that happen for you, and what was that journey?
Well, so my my journey was is pretty well, I don't know that it's unique actually now that I think about it. I feel like I've heard a lot of my friends in New York experience something similar, but I had actually met him pretty much a few months into my whole, like, dating, going on over 50 different dates, or rather over 30 unique dates. Some of them were repeats, but it was something like 50s, or that number. And I met him in that time. And he was an example of someone that I felt really good around, but that I just didn't let myself really pursue it because I was like, this is going to end poorly. I had anticipated this outcome for some reason. And so fast forward to this point where I decided to, like, really stop dating and get into work, is I was, like, super focused on work and really just kind of doing my own thing, and he was reaching out quite a bit and I just wasn't entertaining it. Then fast forward again to when the city was shut down and things were really scary in New York. We had gone on a date, like, a month before everything shut down. And it was in part because I thought, okay, I'm accountable to these stories that I've created and why my last breakup happened. So I'm just going to go for someone that I really like because I want to feel good and I shouldn't try to play out these movies. He was that person. So we end up dating for a while, but it turned into a bit of a situationship because I think I was just, like, I was like, okay, well, now I chose the guy that I really want to be with, but he's not totally bought in, so I'm just going to control the situation. And I really was very masculine in my approach to our relationship at that time. Is I was like, I got into the over nurturing mode. I don't want to say nurturing is bad. It's not. It's wonderful. But the way that I did it was too much. And I just wasn't, like, I wasn't relaxed. I wasn't, like, a source of fun. I wasn't leaning into my intuition. And all of that anxiety, bringing it into the relationship, I'm sure really, like, turned him off from that. I haven't asked him explicitly because I don't feel the need to, like, go into that level of detail with him. But this culminated in me ending it with him because I was like, I can't deal with this uncertainty of being in a situationship. Um, and then I enrolled, and I was like, oh,
You mean
I
enrolled into the
could,
program?
yeah, I enrolled
Yeah.
and claimed, and I was like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I can actually, I wasn't this person, even though this feminine side of me was something that I wanted to practice. And at first, I had a lot of friends who were like, don't go back to him, don't try this again. He was in the wrong. And, girlfriends are always going to try to have your back because they only hear your side of the story, but no one heard his
Mhm.
side. So I was like, in my body, though, I felt good about reaching back out to him. But I knew now that I had this framework and that I still needed to continue to date other people because he was just potentially like one of various men that I could end up in a committed relationship with. And just like in kind of allowing the program to sort of run its course, ultimately there was a point where, the conversation happened, and then I met his parents, and then I was like, okay, this is the claim. So um
What was the
the
conversation? Even about exclusivity
um
or
yeah, exclusivity, and also just like it was a pretty um I like one of the stories that I had told myself back when I told you I was suddenly coming to terms with the part that I played in my relationships was that I would never like be someone that a guy wants to introduce to their family because
Mm.
my family is so broken. And I had always heard this, quote or trope like, when if you marry the girl, you marry her family. And I was like, oh God, like no one's gonna want to do that. Like if I'm a package deal.
Mm.
And that was partly why I decided, oh, maybe I don't want to decide it. I didn't actually decide this. I created another story where I was like, I'm not going to be in a committed relationship. I'm not going to get married, and I won't have a family because no
Mm.
one will want to marry me if they know what my family is like, which in retrospect is also very disrespectful to my family. Like I regret ever feeling that way. Um, but that like meeting his family and also they just had such like wonderful things to say about me. They were so supportive, and he has had so many wonderful things to say about me. It like even though there was a conversation of exclusivity for me meeting the parents, that's when I was like, whoa, this program like really works because it's not just at that point it wasn't about like him. I was like, I've gotten to the point where I feel comfortable meeting his family and like having a just an easy anxiety free um experience with it, you know.
Beautiful. Well, congratulations, Tony. I'm super happy and excited for you. And my last question for you before we finish is, for women who are watching and listening and who perhaps are now where you have been, they probably they're dating and they're kind of having fun, but they're still attracting men who don't want to commit or who are emotionally unavailable. Why would you recommend signing up for a discovery call and joining the program?
I would recommend signing up for a discovery call because I think similar to what you said earlier and what others have said about the program, I think you mentioned Christina, it's so common and accepted to invest in yourself in socially acceptable ways like for your career or going to the gym to work out and all these other things that do improve you and ultimately make you feel better. If you feel like something about the world of understanding more about your femininity and having truly like a framework that I think I will use for the rest of my life. Um, if that's something that you find even remotely interesting, then a discovery call is like the perfect place to sort of feel that out for yourself and understand if it's a good fit. And like I said, it's so the dating aspects of it and finding a committed masculine man is like a wonderful goal. And I think everyone in the program can achieve that truly. But you will be pleasantly surprised and so grateful for all the other side benefits that come with it. And like your friends will notice, your family will notice. And it's just very it's like some of the best money I've ever spent, honestly.
Mm. So beautiful to hear you say that. Thank you. So for everybody interested, I highly encourage you to go to claim.com/apply, where you can book your call and fill out a short application. And this is a no strings attached call. Literally, it's all about talking about your current situation, what you want, and whether claimed is the right fit for you, and where you can, and then hopefully we'll see you on the other side where you can join all of us and our amazing community of women. All right, Toni, I thank you so much. This was so great. I'm really proud of you for doing the work, for being a good student in the
Yeah.
program and achieving the results. And yeah, super excited for you. And yeah, just thank you so much. I'm really grateful for your time and for your presence.
Well, thank you for creating the work. I'm so grateful to you.